So Tanner, I know a lot of business owners are making really good money out there, but they feel like they're still feeling stuck. They can't seem to step away. They're always working on the business, like no matter what. And they're building real wealth, but they're not feeling like they're building it. Like, why does this happen?
It's such a good question. Let's be real. Most business owners actually don't own a business. They actually own more of a job, right? So they have all this extra stress, and a lot of times it's just them. So if we think of like the vast majority of businesses out there, and if you go to your local business broker and you ask them a little bit about kind of some statistics around the businesses that they see, things like that, it's something like 85% of businesses, or maybe it's about 80%, but it's a really high proportion of the businesses don't have any employees. It's really just the owner. So in that realm, it's really they own a job. It's their job. They do own it, but it's not really a business. It's not an asset. So, to really think about that question when it comes to maybe making some decent money, but I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like, there's just so much to do that I'm not really getting ahead. I know some business owners that are making, a few $100,000 a year. Sometimes that's actual profit coming off the business. Sometimes that's just the sales number, depending on kind of how they want to take a look at it. But they're stuck in this vicious cycle of working crazy hours. They're trapped in their business. In reality, if they take a month off, what happens, right? The business kind of starts to fall apart. Mm-hmm. So I know that we've kind of talked about this in different ways as we have some coaching conversations, things like that. But my favorite way to look at this is that we teach the entrepreneurial ladder. So key concept behind this is, we all start out as students, and then we move to employees. We go work for somebody else. And then a number of us have this little crazy idea that says, hey, I've learned all this stuff from this person. I've had this really good boss, or maybe I've had some pretty bad bosses along the way, and I think I can do it better. So I'm going to go work for myself. I become self-employed. The problem is most of us then realize that now instead of working 40 hours a week, we're working 80 hours a week, and we're working for somebody that's way worse and way less qualified than the person we were working for before, i.e. ourselves, right? And this is kind of that point where you have the teeter-totter. I find the work, I go do the work. I find the work, and I go do the work. And just this vicious cycle around and around and around. I love the framework because as you progress through that, we can then move into managing other people and eventually creating an asset. But when we look at these businesses that do feel stuck, it tends to be really stuck in this self-employed. I own the job. I have to go do everything in the business. I haven't learned to delegate. I haven't learned to bring people onto the team. So really, I just have income. I don't have kind of passive income or things coming, cash flow coming off of the business, because if I stop working today, so does my income stream. Right. So this is it's a really important component to be talking through, because income and wealth are kind of two separate ideas. Wealth is really dependent upon building or buying assets. So when we think about our business that we run, are we building it for just income and know that one day it's going to kind of go away? Or are we actually building it to be an asset? And that's kind of the focus of what we focus on here at Action Coach is building the business as an asset that one day can be sold. So I'd love for us to kind of get into a little bit more conversation on this today, kind of break down really what I see as kind of a 3-phase, I don't know, call it a roadmap to really turn the business into an asset that can help create real wealth for people, not just pay the bills or create that basic lifestyle.
Wow, you really hit the nail on the head there, because like I feel that pain point as a business owner myself when I'm getting into that kind of just stuck in a job in my business rather than getting through that. So I think these 3 main points are going to be great to kind of help get past that threshold, because I think that's where business owners get stuck. They're there, but they're like, okay, what are the tools to take it to the next step?
Yeah. So, to get us started, I'd love to kind of just jump on really probably the top 3, maybe top 3 or 4 kind of key challenge areas or frustrations or really mistakes that kind of see a lot of business owners make. And maybe these are things that you've seen. Maybe mistake isn't the right word. It's probably a phase that we all go through in this learning process to build a business. But the first one is really kind of being in this earn and burn mode. So think about it this way. It doesn't matter if you're a high income earner or you actually are building and running a business. The thing that's always stuck with me is it's not about how much you make, it's how much you keep. So, think about this. If you make $1 million per year, but spend $1,001, you're negative in overall like net income, right? You end up not having anything at the end of the day. Likewise, there's a lot of people out there that can make, 80 grand a year, but only spend 50 and they keep the other 30. And they do that compounding year after year after year and be able to reinvest the additional cash flow from what they make. And they actually are wealthier than those that were making $1 million. So it's really about how much you keep versus how much you make. And when it comes to business, it's really not that much different. So one of the key challenges or key frustrations, friction points when it comes to business is, businesses maybe start making some money, but every dollar either goes back into kind of beefing up the lifestyle because it's like, hey, now I'm making some money. I want to be able to buy this new car. I want to be able to do these things, go on these vacations, or it's just going back into daily operation. There's no actual plan for turning that into actual wealth, right? There isn't a demand on the business to create profits that are put aside for actual investing. And it's not usually the thing that most people think of when they first go into business is like, well, how does the business create these other things for me outside of business? I'm thinking about the business itself. And that tends to be one of the early mistakes that I see with many business owners out there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like that's the thing I experienced too, was just that not really knowing what to do next. And so I think this is hugely important. So I'd like to dive in even deeper, like, okay, help me get through this phase.
Yeah. So, the other couple of things that are important as we think about, all right, now the business is starting to make money, but does the business still rely on me? So that probably kind of pain point or friction point number 2 is the business relies 100% on the owner themselves, right? So this goes back to I own a job. I don't own an actual asset or business quite yet. And really, if I stop working, so does the money. So that's a big component of this is as we start to look at how do we start shifting from job to ownership, we'll start to kind of resolve some of these things. And then when we have the cash flow, are we investing into the right things or reinvesting those dollars into the right things? There's that difference between what am I spending my money on versus what am I investing my money into? And we should be reinvesting back into assets. Now, those assets could be people inside the business. They could be machines or equipment that actually produce additional income within the business. It could be, a number of different things there. Or maybe it's the business doesn't need reinvestment, but I need to take my profits and reinvest them into something else. That's how we create, long-term wealth overall. So these are going to be some of those things that we're going to tackle as we break down kind of the general 3 phases to walk through. But it's really important to know the difference between spending and investing and knowing, am I tracking the results? If I put these dollars out there, do I get a return on those dollars or not? That's kind of that shift in thinking from a consumer to someone who's investing the resources that they're given the ability to reinvest.
Oh, definitely. That's a huge component. I think, building out your team, that's a great first step or a great, as you're going down this business journey to think about investing in people and thinking about investing in partners and things like that. So I think, as a business owner myself, that's something that I've recently come into as well. So, I think that's a huge component for sure.
Awesome. So if you're cool with it, let's jump into kind of the 3 general phases that we can kind of start to tactically, break down here. The first one is starting to create the business that works without you, right? So that is the entire thing that we do here at Action Coach is focusing on how do we create that commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you every single day. I absolutely love this piece, and there's a few different steps to make this happen. And you're familiar with the Action Coach 6 steps to creating passive income and things like that within a business. which
Mhm.
I won't get into much here today, but I want to simplify a few things for us to be thinking about, or some tactical things we can start to do. And the first one is really thinking about, how do we remove ourselves from every aspect of the business? How do we start removing different kind of hats or operational things that we're currently responsible for, and start delegating them to somebody else, right? So some of this may be documenting some of the processes that we do. Now, doing that is not overly difficult. It could be, on a video call like this, and just documenting, how to train somebody on how to do XYZ task in the business. It could be a simple checklist, just documenting some basic things so that you can bring somebody onto the team and say, hey, I'm going to have you take this next step. I'm going to have you start to work on these types of things. One of my favorite things to ask when it comes to looking at the different operational things within the business is, first, is it important to the business?
Mm-hmm.
If the answer is yes, then I ask the second question: do I need to be the one that does it? Or is there somebody else that can do it better than me, that can be just as effective, or at least have the minimum effectiveness that I need for the business?
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of those two things that I think of first. And then we start to document and say, how do we start to shift these things over? So the first step in this kind of initial phase is, how do we start slowly delegating some of these tasks and removing ourselves from the basic operations? Then we start looking at, how do we start increasing the revenue over time? So I'm curious for you, as you've gone through, have you started to delegate a few things? Any lessons learned as you've kind of gone through that process?
I wish, I know I need to delegate more, but yes, I have started, and it's helped me so much, because I got to a point where it was just too much on my plate. And I was able to find a couple of people, especially producing the event I'm doing, to do the parts that they do the best, and then let me kind of step into what I do best. And that was I think the biggest takeaway was, they do it better than me. And that's a great thing. If you find those people that do it better than you, then you can focus on what you do best.
It's so true. The other thing I like to think about is, just because you're really good at something, because I like to think that most of us that go into business for ourselves are pretty good at a lot of stuff. Just because you're good at it doesn't mean that somebody else can't be as good or even better than you. There's a few times where I'm like, well, technically I can do that better than this other person. Yeah, but if they put 100% of their time, energy, and effort to it, is that better than you putting 5% of your time to it? Often the answer is yes. So it's like, all right, we'll just take the leap, let them do it, have a fast feedback loop, find out if, what support they need, where are the mistakes and the failures that they, have kind of come through, and then just help them through that. Eventually they'll get better over time, and you start to realize, I don't have to do it anymore, and it's fantastic. So some of those lessons there. So that's kind of that first phase. We start to move and delegate from there. Then we start to build recurring revenue systems. So, real marketing, in our opinion, is really to think about, how do we buy lifetime customers? And if you're going to have lifetime customers, it's, how do I keep them coming back over and over and over again? The most successful businesses in the world, the most profitable businesses in the world, have customers that come back consistently, time and time and time again. Now, ideally, we can shift and find ways to incorporate, subscription models, retainers, long-term contracts, things like that, so you have built-in recurring revenue. But at a minimum, focused on, how do I ensure that the customers that I have do continue to come back over and over and over again? This is really that revenue and profit generating engine for the business overall. And once we have that, we can start to kind of build on the value of the asset over time. So that's a really big component as we start to step out of the business. How do we ensure that the lifetime value of our customers continues to increase over time? Then we start looking at automation and standard operating procedures, and how do we start hiring the right people that can take on some management roles and things like that. A little bit further on in the journey. For some of you listening, you may be like, whoa, Tanner, I'm not anywhere near ready for that yet. And that's okay. We walk through this process. But as you start getting kind of the recurring revenue and the profitability engine really running, then we can reinvest some of those profits back into systems and technology and people, and those become the assets that allow us to really create some enterprise value for the organization overall. So those are kind of the first three kind of core ways to think about it when we start looking at how do we start building a business that runs without us. And then we can move into what's next, which is turning that business into actual wealth for us in our own portfolio.
Wow. I think these are some great steps to help business owners really get started and thinking about their business beyond where they're at and really get past the threshold of just being in a job that you created for yourself and thinking about your business long term.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one of my favorite things to think about, though, is let's say you do all this, right? You start to build a business that can run without you. You now have a skill set.
Mm-hmm.
How many different times can you duplicate that skill set?
Yeah, definitely. Multiple.
Right. So when we start thinking about like, how do you actually turn a business into real wealth? If I were to ask you, and I'm curious on what your answer is here, but if I were to ask you, why do we invest in businesses? You know, there's a number of different things we can invest in, whether it's stock portfolio, real estate, things like that. Why? What's the primary reason that we invest into businesses?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a multiple ways I could take this. I mean, investing in businesses, I mean, obviously you can create a retirement for yourself.
So my favorite way to think about it is that businesses are for cash flow, right? So yes, there is some capital growth and some asset value that we can have off of a business, but more than really any other vehicle out there, it is the engine that you can control the amount of cash flow that comes off of it. So the idea behind investing in businesses is to spit off as much cash flow as possible, so we can take that cash flow and then reinvest it into other assets. You know, I know several folks who have gotten really strong in their wealth creation portfolio, things like that, and they created business to have the cash flow to then go invest in real estate. And this individual stuck with business and real estate, but the business was for cash flow. The real estate was for capital growth. You know, approximately every 10 years on average, home values will double, things like that. So you have the capital appreciation that comes off that. Yes, there's rental income and things like that as well, but most of the cash flow actually comes from business. So if we think about it this way, instead of taking every dollar out of the business, we focus on how do we take those dollars, increase that cash flow, and then reinvest it into other assets. For some, like I said, it's property and real estate, things like that. It could be into your stock portfolio, it could be into retirement accounts. But hey, you just built a business that runs without you. That's a skill set. Who's to say you can't go buy and build and install another general manager or CEO to run another company that doubles or triples or even quadruples the cash flow? And all of a sudden you have this engine that allows you to just continue to place money into different assets and things like that you can acquire over time.
Definitely. It really works as a driver. Like, it really works as a driver for your future, for different things that you want to take on, the second business, a third business, like you said, real estate, other investments. So I think that's a really great way to kind of clarify the path and mindset business owners can take to really expand.
Absolutely. The big thing is to remember that the business is there to generate the life and the things that you want, right? Yes, we want it to serve a purpose. We want to provide value to the marketplace. If we're not providing value to our clients and customers, the business is not going to survive anyway. So we need that is, to me, a default of being in business. But the reason we get into business is to be able to create that ability. And think about how much demand do we put on our business to generate profitability for the owner so that we can continue to place that investment in different ways. Now, some people may say, I just want to build the biggest portfolio ever. Fantastic. Others may say, I want to give back. I want to do more things. Well, if you had $1 million coming off of your business is in free cash flow that was not required to go back into the business, and you wanted to just give back to your community, what could you do with $1 million? How much good could you do for other people? Like that, it just empowers you to do different things. So everyone will have their own way or their own definition of what that looks like for them. But this gives you that vehicle of creating what real wealth can look like and the amount of impact that you can have. So as we kind of like bring this all to close, I said there was going to be 3 phases. So that's phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 3 then is ultimately building the business so that you can sell it. Doesn't mean you have to sell it, but if you can build it as a saleable asset, running the company this way will create more value, will allow you to think about these different things that we've just talked about, and ultimately start to acquire more business assets. So we want to structure it as something that we can sell, even if we never choose to sell it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a big differentiator there, because I think that's where the fear comes in for business owners. Like, oh, I have to exit. Oh, I have to sell. Well, just be prepared to sell, rather than, that doesn't mean you have to, like, oh, you have to sell your business on this day. Like, I think that's a great, because I get caught up in that mindset. It's like, oh, I'm building because I have to sell. No, just build it so you can.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting right now, because I'm sure if you're in business, you may have heard some of the statistics out there, but we're probably going through the biggest kind of wealth transfer like ever. Right? There's all of these baby boomers that are looking to exit and sell their businesses. The challenge, though, is a lot of these businesses are either aren't selling, or they're being sold for so much less than the owner actually wants out of it, because they didn't build it as something that could sell. So now you're stuck with this business that's fully required for the owner to be in it, and half these businesses are closing down. It's something that's near and dear to my heart, is looking out at Main Street communities, downtowns, things like that, and just seeing businesses close that have been on on that street for 30 years, and they're just closing because nobody really wants to come in and take over something that they have to go into and operate every single day, because the business was built as a job, not as an actual business. So it is important to think about that, right? We're all going to exit the business one day, whether it's by our choice or not. Can't take it with us in the afterlife. So, we have to kind of recognize that one day the business is going to transition to closure, transition to somebody else, sell it, whatever it is, something's going to happen, right? So I'm a big believer in, how do we continue to create that staying power in the business overall? It ultimately creates more value for our communities, for us as the owners. But it gives us kind of that freedom to make that choice when the time comes. Doesn't mean you have to today or make that final decision today. That all said, I will make the caveat, because I know that there's some out there that would be like, well, Tanner, I don't want to build a business. I just want to have a job that I own. And is that okay? Right? I just want to be a solopreneur and that sort of thing. It's like, yes, it is. I would still encourage, if the goal is to create long-term wealth, what do you do with the cash flow that's required? So let's say you're a solopreneur and you can make $400,000 or $500,000 per year, just doing all the work yourself. There's very little overhead, so you do get to take most of that home. I'd highly encourage that you still look for assets to buy and ultimately build, right? Whether that's real estate, that's a stock portfolio, it's something else that you can put that money into. Choose a portion of that for the long-term building, so that one day when you choose to close it down, you have enough passive income that's going to allow you to continue to sustain and do the things that you and your family want to do for the rest of your lives.
That's a great way to look at it. I think there's so many amazing nuggets in this, especially just setting you up for success as a business owner, to go to each step, each phase of the process, and, make a home run.
I love that. So I'll give you my final takeaways as we kind of wrap up the conversation today. At the end of the day, the goal isn't just to make money, but it's really to create and build that financial freedom that lasts beyond just you. There's so much impact in life that you have to give for your family, for your community, for everything else. If you're going to take the time to build something that really continues to provide value long term. If you're still stuck working in the business every single day, start small. Pick one thing that you can delegate in this next week. Create a fast feedback loop, but just hand something off. Choose one thing that you can go hand off to somebody else, whether it's a virtual admin, it's a team member that's already on your team. Find something that you can take off your plate, and get that feedback loop of what happens when you do that. That's your first step to start kind of getting yourself out of every single thing in the business, and create the path to the journey of having a business that can ultimately run without you one day.
Well, thank you so much, Tanner. This was so clarifying, and really just gives those action items on how to be successful in business, and to not fear growing, and embrace the growth and change as it comes along.
Amazing. Fun conversation.